A few years ago, I lended my short little thoughts on each albums throughout Metallica's discography. I don't really like that video anymore. So with the release of Metallica's new album, 72 Seasons, I thought I would go back and give more in-depth thoughts on their albums. Just to be clear, we're only going to be talking about their core 11 albums, okay? No EPs, no non-album singles, no live albums, no cover tunes, especially not their cover of Now I Wanna Sniff Some Glue. I also won't be discussing Lulu, their collaboration with the late Lou Reed, not because I don't like it, but because I haven't listened to it, and therefore I don't have an opinion on it. I know that's like an insane thought process nowadays, but just stick with me on it. So, to start off, 40 years ago, what were the Metallica guys up to?
Destroy the child. Corrupt them all.
Kill 'Em All released in 1983 on Megaforce Records. It's loud, it's brash, it's aggressive, and it's their best album by far because Dave Mustaine wrote most of it! In all seriousness, it's a pretty strong debut in my opinion. Is it in my personal upper echelons of debut albums? No, but it's kind of close. Metallica were still wearing their influences right on their sleeves. Blistering speedy riffs reminiscent of Motorhead on tracks like Motor Breath and Whiplash. Vocally, the then 19-year-old James Hetfield is doing all these piercing high screams a la Rob Halford, which are prominent on tracks like the striking opener Hit the Lights. Damn, I'm 19 and I can hardly attempt those screams. And the instrumental performances are filled with energy and drive that just bleed punk music. Kirk Hammett's solos are particularly wild, especially on tracks like Hit the Lights and Seek and Destroy. However, most of these high qualities for me are held back by the production. It's their first album. They were poor. Megaforce had just started out. I understand why the production is what it is. It still doesn't boast a fair fight against the production that would come later for Metallica. But at the same time, it also does. We'll get to that in a bit, but point is, production kinda like not good. Their songwriting here is also not as versatile and developed as their later works, which to me isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it leads to tracks like the closer Metal Militia in the context of the rest of the album feeling pretty stale. Phantom Lord is my least favorite track here. It isn't a bad song, and it has neat bits and pieces, but needed a stronger overall composition. There are also songs with elements I'm more mixed on now, like Seek and Destroy. While it has a cool main riff, a fantastic bridge, and like I said before, a great Kirk solo, the song does definitely take a while to get to the meat of it. The chorus is also very gimmicky, but I bet that's way more fun live than in my room by myself. I guess I'll find out when I see them in August. But there are also some through and through excellent moments, such as Jump in the Fire with its incredibly catchy hooks and riffs, and the pulling teeth bass solo penned by the late great Cliff Burton, which is an awesome metal timestamp. For my favorite track nowadays, I'm usually torn between Motor Breath and the Four Horsemen. Today I'm leaning more towards Motor Breath. Four Horsemen is still better than Mechanics. So all in all, while not their best foot forward, it's a very distinctive debut. Metallica still needed to fully come into their own, but there are still some fantastic tracks here. I recommend it.
Mr. Electric, send him to the principal's office and have him expelled!
This Blue Beast of an album was a huge artistic step up from Kill 'Em All, in my opinion. A more refined and mature sound, a more dynamic track list. The songwriting substance shot up exponentially, and all Cliff had to do was show them some music theory. Way more adventurous compositions such as the ominous and moody closing instrumental The Call of Cthulhu, and the megaton of heaviness that is For Whom the Bell Tolls. Cliff's bass intro on that song also, mwah. The melodies are more memorable, like on the thrash excellence that is Creeping Death, and the guitar harmonies, oh my god! There are so many harmonic spotlights throughout this album, with probably the most notable being the intro on the thunderous haha title track. And the production, while not perfect, is way more powerful than Kill 'Em All, which can be felt right off the bat with the opener Fight Fire with Fire. The song starts off with these nice acoustic lines. It's almost kind of soothing, but then it turns into something bombastic and urgent. The lyrical topics are also a lot more interesting this time around. There's talk of nuclear warfare and capital punishment, as well as Ernest Hemingway novels for some reason. One of my favorite sets of lyrics on here are on their first power ballad, Fade to Black, which talks about suicide. The song's emotional vulnerability is very captivating to me. The melodies and acoustic guitars are also very rich. The entire song is gut-punching, and it might just be my favorite on the album. For my least favorite, I hate to be that guy, but Escape has always been the oddball on the album with its lighter riffs and uplifting chorus. It was in fact a song that the record company wanted and not Metallica. I like it just fine, but it does feel less confident than the other tracks, which is ironic considering its lyrics. Overall, a huge leap in the right direction for me, and surprisingly, they'd only get better from here. As for Ride the Lightning, I strongly recommend it.
It's crazy that they made this album for Stranger Things. It really is. It's kind of insane.
Somehow, in the same year as Rain and Blood and Peace Sells, Metallica's Master of Puppets still stood to be the crown jewel. Anthrax had to wait a little bit, but their thing was cool too. Said it before and I'll say it again, this album is basically just Ride the Lightning but better. It starts off with an acoustic intro leading into a thrash intro track. Next, a multi-layered thrash title track, a slower and heavier third track, then the power ballad, then another thrash bash, a mid-tempo tune with some potent lyrics, an instrumental, and one last thrash cut. They're basically fraternal twins. And I say fraternal because while the sequencing is basically the exact same, the musicianship on Master of Puppets is more grand and epic in scale. Whether it be the emotionally vigorous Welcome Home, the creepy and alluring The Thing That Should Not Be, or the passionate instrumental Orion. And the more thrashy sections are outstanding. I can't help but headbang at the pummeling riffs in the galloping opener Battery and the brisk Disposable Heroes. The latter of the two I also find to be very vivid in its storytelling. All the lyrics throughout this album are very enthralling, with every song sans Orion in some way relating to feelings of being powerless, being the puppet to the master. The production is also quite tighter than previous releases. The performances are once again excellent. I haven't mentioned him yet in the video, but the drummer Lars Ulrich does a great job on this album. All of these elements came together wonderfully on the iconic title track, which is my favorite track. It contains some of the best and catchiest riffs in all of metal, with compelling lyrics about drug addiction. Not to mention the beautiful melodic breakdown. I'd say Damage Inc. is the weakest track on the album, but it's still a great closer to a great album. There's a reason this metal monster has been praised to death by everyone and their dog. I strongly recommend it.
Max, what do you want for dinner?
Justice.
1988 and Justice for All. I still to this day catch myself thinking it's 89 for some reason. I guess 89 is a more appealing number to me than 88. While this album does break the uphill streak they were going on for me, it's still a pretty good release. The band decided to go with a more complex approach with their songwriting. Some people even consider it to be progressive metal, shown as much by the frantic and frequent time signature changes on the opener Blackened. It switches a lot from 4/4 to 6/4 to 7/4, and it has one of the best riffs I've ever heard in 7/4. But for me, the complexity throughout the album is kind of a double-edged sword. My least favorite track, The Frayed Ends of Sanity, is basically just like riff soup. It's a bunch of ideas thrown together that don't always line up well for me. And there are tracks like the title track, which contains a lot of grandiosity that I expect at this point from Metallica, but at points it does get a little carried away, clocking in at almost 10 minutes. I feel like Harvester of Sorrow also works better live than, again, in my room alone. There are these drawn-out build-ups into heavy passages that don't feel as exciting as they could have been in the studio recording. It's definitely not supported by the mix, and this is where I will get into my number one complaints with the album. The production. It's trash. The drums are too loud and crowding. The thick guitar tone is pretty rigid. The overall mix just feels too stiff to me. And do I even need to mention the needle in the haystack that is Jason Newsted's bass? Most of these songs would land better for me if they just felt more lively, and the production does not fulfill that. But I've been talking pretty negatively about this, and I bet some people think I hate it, but this does still boast some of Metallica's best songs. I've mentioned the wild and mean opener Blackened. I also enjoy The Shortest Straw. The closer Dyer's Eve is a thrash mammoth, and my favorite track is 100% the Power Ballad 1. Do we call it a power ballad? Because it very much reads like Fade to Black and Welcome Home. Well, whatever you call it, I call it phenomenal. One of Metallica's most emotionally and aggressively intense numbers to date, with lyrics based on a really disturbing story, Johnny Got His Gun. It's about this soldier that gets blown up during war and loses his limbs, hearing, eyesight, and mouth, and is basically left as a consciousness trapped in his own body. The second half of that song is still as ultra exhilarating as it was when it came out. All in all, it still has some incredible tunes, but for me, it needed more time in the oven to bring more polish to the production and compositions. I slightly recommend it.
The Black Album, second verse is like devil's pie. Say some dessert for us.
Their 1991 colossal success that was the self-titled release, commonly referred to as the Black Album. Now, I'm going to be upfront about this. I'm very biased towards this one. Some of my earliest memories are actually jamming to this album in the car with my family. I'm also biased towards good music because this album rules. Moving from their worst 80s production to their best production ever, courtesy of Bob Rock. This is one of the best produced albums I've ever heard. It's gigantic. It's alive. The album just sounds like it belongs in a stadium, as exemplified by the anthemic tracks like the opener Enter Sandman and Wherever I May Roam. The songwriting is more simple compared to Justice, but remember kids, less complexity does not automatically equal bad. As the hooks and riffs here are still incredibly catchy and memorable, I'm thinking of the bulky Sad But True, the badass Don't Tread On Me, and the atmospheric of Wolf and Man. The tracks The God That Failed and My Friend in Misery have so much emotional weight musically and lyrically. And the ballad that everyone knows, Nothing Else Matters, is still incredibly gorgeous. There are even still some faster cuts on here in Holier Than Thou and Through the Never. My favorite track out of the bunch is the eloquent The Unforgiven. It's also my favorite Metallica song and one of my favorite songs ever. I love every millisecond of this song, from the compelling story, creative composition, passionate performances, my favorite Kirk Hammett solo, and one of James Hetfield's best vocal performances. James's vocals in general are the best they've ever been here. His signature grit and might is brought to actual singing and not just screaming. And yeah, I do think the closer The Struggle Within is the weakest song on the album, but yet again, it's a great closer to a groundbreaking album. If I had more time, I could go on and on about every song, but unfortunately, I have this thing called a life. And I often find myself having this album as the soundtrack to it. I strongly recommend it. At this point, Metallica could have easily put out Black Album 2 and made a gazillion more dollars, but they were like, how about we go in the complete opposite direction? That still makes money. And they came out with Load, a more hard rock inspired album with some dashes of alternative and southern rock. And to me at least, I was all cool with the idea, but the execution is not perfect. I like some of the more brooding and dramatic tracks like Hero of the Day and the closer The Outlaw Torn, and these moody cuts like Until It Sleeps and The Thorn Within. And there are still some kick-ass rock tunes like Wasting My Hate and the Enter Sandman clone King Nothing. And you know what? I like Mama Said. Don't give me that, oh, it's a country ballad. You come into my house and disrespect country music, I'm a yeehaw yo ass with a cactus. There are some awesome songs on Load, but there are also songs that are not that. Not actively bad, just odd. The talkbox solo on the House Jack build, the slap bass on Cure, the twangy riff on Ronnie. Ronnie is probably my least favorite track here, but shout out to all the Ronnies out there. Some songs I like with one or a few asterisks. 2x4 is a fine groovy tune, but I don't really care for the bridge. The 8-minute Bleeding Me is a multi-layered tune, but I'm still not 100% sold on it. And I mostly enjoy the opener Ain't My Bitch, but it does read like a dad rock kind of tune with a surf rock-esque solo that's pretty weird. The production is pretty dirty, which works for some of the harder moments, but I'm mixed on it for the others. And as for a favorite track, I'm gonna go with Hero of the Day. I really like its more reserved approach, which leads to this explosion of aggression. So yeah, Load has its awkward moments, but it wasn't the worst transition Metallica could have made. I slightly recommend it. Oh, and if you didn't know already, this cover is a mix of semen and cow blood. Reload feels largely the same as its sister set of songs that we just talked about, although this does have a bit more bite added onto it. That much can be seen on tracks like Prince Charming and the opener Fuel, which is basically speeding down the highway the song. A little bit of intimidation on the groovy tracks like the sinister Devil's Dance. I also adore the S&M version of Devil's Dance, but we're not here to talk about S&M. A few tracks that have some extravagant qualities to them, like the anthemic The Memory Remains. Marianne Faithfull's feature on that song is iconic. A bit more somberness to the ballads like Low Man's Lyric and The Unforgiven 2. The latter of those, as a continuation to my favorite Metallica song, it does progress the story nicely, although the last line of that chorus will forever be corny. However, the weaker moments here to me are lower than the ones on Load. The spacious Where the Wild Things Are has always been a head scratcher for me. The track Attitude has some cool riffs, but I don't much care for the composition or lyrics. And Carpe Diem Baby is one of Metallica's worst ballads to date. My least favorite track being Bad Seed, which is definitely one bad seed. The riffs and hooks on this one are not appealing to me, like, at all. For a favorite track, give me fuel, give me fire, give me that which I desire. And on the whole, Reload is a more mixed bag than Load for me. I think it's okay.
I am f***ing fuming! Mega fucking fuming!
Saint Anger is the best album to ever exist ever in the history of man and also women. Thank you, I am so brave. Just kidding, 20 years later, Saint Anger still sucks. Sorry, not sorry. Upon re-listening to this, I did find myself laughing at more moments. So that's a plus at least. Like the cringy lyrics. I understand James Hetfield's mindset at the time, and James has never been this master lyric writer, but it's really rough here. Tear it down, strip the layers off, my turpentine, old paint, old looks. This sounds like a Walmart Limp Bizkit song. James's vocals are crude and unrefined. His backing vocals are as loud as his leads, and that's pretty disorienting. Although the part in My World where he's like, "It's my world, sucker!" that is objectively hilarious. course, I can't go without mentioning the production on here, which is Metallica's worst. Ironically, Bob Rock attempting to get them to sound like they're jamming in a garage made it sound like they were screaming from a garbage can. Oh, and would you look at that? Lars even used a garbage can as an instrument. The guitar and bass are muddy as hell, and at points I can't even tell the difference between them. Only made worse by how this album is mega overblown, with some of these songs going on and on just to go on and on. 8-minute long tracks like Some Kind of Monster being the most egregious. Though I will say I'm personally not bothered by the lack of Kirk Hammett solos because I don't think Metallica 100% needs guitar solos to be good. They need some great riffs, tight compositions, compelling vocals, things this does not have. Shoot Me Again has a funny chorus and an unengaging everything else. Purify has some of the worst riffs and passages Metallica has ever released. And the chorus to the opener, Frantic, is an odd mix of awkward, softer guitars and annoying but hilarious cries from James professing his love for TikTok. On Dirty Windows, somehow they made the snare sound way worse. And on Invisible Kid, my least favorite track, and my least favorite Metallica song, the whole song sounds worse with the guitars in a lower tuning, made even worse by its meandering on for 8 minutes like that. As for a favorite track, The Unnamed Feeling is the most bearable to me, considering it has the least amount of snare pounding and the most amount of softer moments. Although it's still redundant, the bridge is pretty bad, as well as James's "Been here before." There are a few neat riffs here and there, all ruined by being on this album. Like, I think the title track has a neat intro, very much subverted by the production. The Garbage Pail Kids really be bumping this one. I strongly don't recommend it.
Yeah, bitch! Magnets! Oh!
Know that going into re-listening to this album in particular, I've always had the least to say about it, since I don't really care about it. Yeah, Saint Anger is bad, but like I said, it's kind of a funny bad. For me at least, this album values style over substance, as Metallica wanted to get reacquainted with their thrash metal roots. But as I'm saying that, I do recognize that the band are playing their asses off here. I'm especially reminded of the opener That Was Just Your Life, which does have an awesome main riff, and James Hetfield kind of rapping in the verses, which is something I didn't know I needed. But the difficulty is also partially because of the song lengths. These songs have no business being this long. A lot of these 8-ish minute tunes like The End of the Line and The Judas Kiss are filled out with extended passages that are very much not necessary in my opinion, with the worst coming in the form of the 10-minute instrumental Suicide and Redemption. And these do have a few neat parts that I enjoy, but the songs in their entirety feel like a student doing whatever they can to extend their essay and meet the page count. My least favorite track being Broken, Beaten, and Scarred. None of the riffs or lyrics really interested me, and the main riff doesn't feel strong enough to be the main idea of the track. Now there are a few tunes I mostly enjoyed. Cyanide's intro and verses were fun, and I do get invested in The Day That Never Comes. But with the latter, while I do like it, I do recognize that it's basically Metallica saying, what if we made a song where the first half is like Fade to Black, but the second half is like One? The Unforgiven 3 is my favorite track on here. Now that might be my Unforgiven bias showing, but I found this third installment to be the most emotionally enticing and suspenseful on the album. As for the production, look, Rick Rubin has done some of the best metal production, whether we're talking about his work with Slayer or System of a Down. This is not. At least the production isn't as bad as Saint Anger, and I mostly say the same thing about the entire album. At least it's not as bad as before. But alas, I don't really recommend it.
War has changed.
Hardwired to Self-Destruct. I really like that title. Compared to the last two albums, for me, this one is a big leap in quality for me, with a solid track list decently balancing thrashy and heavy tracks. The opener Hardwired is a tight in and out thrash track, no BS. I've seen a lot of people brag on it, but I enjoy the beefy Dream No More. The closer Spit Out the Bone is eruptive with an awesome Robert Trujillo bass feature reminiscent of Cliff Burton. And Atlas Rise was quite engaging and interesting to me with some catchy riffs and vocals. A lot of parts here are way more hooky than Death Magnetic. I'm particularly reminded of the setting and storytelling of Confusion. My favorite track is Moth into Flame. I love the groove on this tune and the lyrics talking about addiction and fame and both at the same time. But this is not a perfect release, of course. There are tracks here that I just find decent or fine, like Here Comes Revenge or the Lemmy Kilmister tribute Murder One. My least favorite track is Man Unkind, which, first of all, stupid song title. Second of all, most of the song feels pretty directionless. There are a few little mini moments that are cool on their own, but when all put together, it feels way too unfocused. And again, unfortunately, there are spots where Metallica seems to drag out the songs to hit the 77-minute mark. The most notable point for me being the outro to Halo on Fire, which I was really enjoying up until the outro lasted for 2 minutes. The part itself works, but why 2 minutes? We all know the song is ending. Don't overdo it. There are a few songs that still feel too long and uninteresting, but others here don't waste a single second. I slightly recommend it. I firstly want to address that this album came out days ago and I've had years to digest the other albums. I only say that because when I personally talk about this album, it just feels weird for some reason. Maybe that's because it's the first Metallica album release I've been actively engaged in, or maybe it's because I expected more. Because it's kind of clear to me that Metallica are not interested in doing much new stylistically, considering this is very similar to Hardwired. Similar vibe, similar performances. The production is practically the same, although the bass is quite louder and even has more prominent moments. Let's all give a collective hooray for Robert being able to shine for more than 2 seconds. And I do like the sound of Hardwired, but it would have been nice if they went in a different direction. As of right now, I'd say the highlights on Hardwired shine brighter, but the quality of the songs on 72 Seasons is more consistent. The opening title track is pretty energetic, balancing thrash and heavy riffs. Too Far Gone is a really good high point for me. I love the bridge on this one. And the track Chasing Light stuck out to me as fiery. The lyrics throughout this album are interesting, talking about the perceptions we gain in the first 18 years of our lives, which is pretty relevant to me considering I just turned 19. I particularly enjoy the focus on self-reflection and judgment on Room of Mirrors, as well as the track Screaming Suicide, which talks about the taboo nature of discussing suicide. They continue to be one of few older, more masculine appearing bands that is this vulnerable and honest with their emotions, which is a big plus for me. But now and again, there are tracks that aren't as strong as they could have been. I think of Sleepwalk My Life Away. I think of Crown of Barbed Wire. Quite a few riffs throughout the album that Metallica thought were stronger than they were. And the most notable difference for me being something that wasn't as apparent on Hardwired for me, but very much so on other releases. That's right, everyone. This album is unnecessarily long. How are we still doing this 20 years later? Granted, I don't think it's as egregious as Death Magnetic or Saint Anger, but I guess something just like flipped in their heads at the turn of the century for them to think, you know what our tunes need? More fat. I don't know about you, but when I listen to Metallica, I like their stuff to be thrilling. Unlike tracks including If Darkness Had a Sun, which, while I really like the verses and choruses here, the rest of it feels like a stupid extended cut and not the official release. Filled out with mid-tempo chugging galore. My least favorite track, You Must Burn, is about as padded out to the extreme as it gets. And the closer,
Enamorada.
While it has its neat moments, even calling back to My Friend in Misery, did it really need to be 11 minutes? This is mostly why, at the moment, my favorite track is the 3-minute long Lux Eterna. Just a pure speed metal tune with some new wave of British heavy metal type riffing. Short but sweet kick-ass number. Anyways, all in all, the meat of the matter here is pretty good, but Metallica really needs to work out this length issue and bring fresher ideas if they want more new material to be up to snuff with their classics. I guess I slightly recommend it. And that's pretty much it. If you've been looking to get into Metallica, I would say start off with Master of Puppets, the Black Album, and Ride the Lightning. That order works well. And I'm just going to end this video with a clip from the first video I made a few years ago. Don't watch that whole video, though. And with that being said, I'm just going to annoy you guys so that you leave. Are they gone yet?